We have a lot to talk about today, and this is your girl, Coy. So I'm speaking to the Melanation. Ladies and gents, sun kissed by God's lips, I'm here to bring it to you real, unfiltered, and uncut today. So today we're going to be talking about George Floyd's services in Houston. We're going to talk about policing in this country, what it means to defund the police, and we're going to be talking about, I'm only going to do this one time because this woman is a con woman, but y'all have really DM'd, Facebooked, and everything about Candace Owens, and for some reason you want me to weigh in. I'm not quite sure why, but never fear, Coy is here. And we're going to talk about Dallas. Well, we're going to talk about black politics. We're going to talk about politics in particular in Dallas, and how this lone white man is creating black on black crime. I hate that term, but I'm using it as a euphemism for the ridiculousness of it all in Dallas politics. But before we get started, I want to give a shout out to all of the companies who just now decided that police officers killing black people is a no-no. So I want to start with just giving a shout out to Cadillac. They made a statement, and their statement said, Cadillac would not be Cadillac without the outstanding contributions of black people. While we made cars, Black America made our cars a lifestyle. We won't stay silent when it comes to black life. Well, we certainly appreciate you. All right, this is Carmen to Black Tea Sip. I'll be right back. Take a quick break and stay tuned. We got a lot to talk about, and I'm going to give it to you raw and uncut. All right. Now, when Cadillac made that statement, their statement said that they would not be who they are without black people. We certainly appreciate Cadillac and everybody who wants to be with us in this moment. It is a moment that has been a long time coming. It took the senseless murder, as we know, of George Floyd, but it also took the senseless murders of Breonna Taylor and the senseless murder of David Mcatee, both of which were in Louisville, Kentucky. It took the senseless murder of Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old. I'm going to touch on him in a little while. It took the senseless murder of Trayvon Martin, who was minding his own business, only going to get a tea and some Skittles. But, we can't do that either. We can't possibly go get a run to the store. It takes us to not be able to breathe. It took Christian in the dog park. And so we are well aware of all of the things that we're not supposed to be able to do. But the senselessness of it all has erupted into what we have now. So the state of the Black Union now has allies, something I'm not so sure that we had previously. And so because of that, I think that we are starting to see a shift and a change in where we have been all of this time. But what strikes me as so peculiar, what strikes me as this moment in time that we have not been before, or what strikes us all, I guess, is this moment in time where we haven't been before, is that now we have white people saying, I get it now. And so what's confusing to me is it took all of these deaths for you to get it now. Now, they get it. And I just think that as we culminate this movement and in this moment, we need to also be aware of the fact that we haven't had this before. And what it took for us to get civil rights passed in 1963 and 1965, it took all of that. It took us being in a situation in which we were not able to readily live our lives and see about ourselves in a way that was meaningful or useful to Black people. In fact, the president of the United States, the orangutan running the three-ring circus from the Oval Office, suggested that he was going to have his rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, some people would say we're overthinking this thing, but the truth of the matter is, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, we had Black Wall Street. Now, in DeSoto, Texas, for those of you that know what I'm talking about, we have what we have called Black Wall Street, because down Hampton Road, for those of you that are familiar with the Metroplex, we have several Black businesses. And so we have called it Black Wall Street. And at Friendship West Baptist Church, we hold every year we hold an opportunity for Black businesses, like a showcase, if you will. And so we have termed that Black Wall Street. And it stems from Tulsa, Oklahoma, when we had a Black bank, we had Black businesses, and we were thriving in our own segregated community. And so we called it Black Wall Street. Well, because white people were not well versed in agriculture, because they had been getting it free from us prior to the antebellum South. Shout out to Lady Antebellum, decided they would be called Lady A instead of Antebellum, because it has a tie to a Confederate mind, a lost cause kind of mind. Those of you that are familiar with the Black Tea Sip know that I talk about the last cause philosophy. The lost cause was intended to misrepresent what happened with the South. That's why we have the Confederate flag, and many white people are having a problem. Sincerely, I know I just butchered his name, but he doesn't matter because he hasn't won a race. He's been like 32 races and he hasn't placed even. So, but he has decided he's not going to participate in NASCAR anymore, because Bubba Wallace, who has won in 2016, a Black NASCAR racer, called for the condemning of Confederate flag at NASCAR, because it is a symbol of hate and racism and terror for Black people, especially Black people in the South. So this white guy who's never won, I mean, he's, 28. He hasn't won, so, but he said he's not going to participate anymore. But all of these things are from this lost cause philosophy of the Confederate flag and the Confederacy, which wanted to continue to enslave people of a melanated nation. And so now Trump has decided that he's going to go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and have his rally on June 19th. So June 13th through the 19th is to commemorate the time that Black people found out that they were free. You remember the Emancipation Proclamation was signed by Abraham Lincoln in November of 1863. We did not get the word in Texas until June 13th through the 19th. And so we call it Juneteenth, and we usually celebrate on June 19th. And so we have just gotten an FU from the President of the United States of America. So the orangutan is running the three-ring circus now in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He's also asked that people who are going to attend his rally sign a waiver saying that they are not going to sue the promoters or organizers and him if they contract COVID-19, because since the protest, it's been spiking. In Dallas alone, we've got almost 300 cases. In Tarrant County, I think they have, which is Fort Worth, for those of you that don't know, Fort Worth, Texas, and the surrounding areas. They have 212. So 285 the week the protest shot up. The next day, 290 something in Dallas. 258, I'm sorry. And then the very next day, 285. They're spiking. People want to know the how comes and whys. Well, I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to address that. However, the President of the United States has told us to screw ourselves. In Black America, you need to pay attention. And if you're Black and you're a Trump supporter, well, he's saying it to you too. I've told you we'd be talking about George Floyd's funeral, his services. They had a service in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where he was living, and then they commemorated his life and the legacy. And I want to use that word very specifically, the legacy of his life in Houston, Texas, where he grew up. I want to give a shout out to his niece, young woman who was righteously angry. And I am using that word the way I want to use it. I'm using it in a way that speaks to the heart of the matter. She was righteously angry. She was not just angry. She was righteously angry. She had every right to be angry. And so there seems to be this notion that when we are gunned down, murdered, killed, slain, drugged like the man in Jasper until his head popped off, that we should be humble and we should speak against violence and we should talk down the crowds. And yes, I am not saying that we should be proponents of violence and that we should speak to looting, stealing, murder, burning. I'm not saying that we should do that. I am saying when they are silent about it, there's a reason. I am saying that when people are so hurt and that hurt that they are feeling there's no reasonable or plausible explanation for it, and they know to the core of their being and every fiber in their DNA makeup, every molecular source of who they are is saying this is wrong. Well, then that's called righteous anger. And shout out to that young woman, George Floyd's niece, because she was righteously angry. And with my boys in the hood t-shirt on, I understand, young sister. But I'm hoping that she will use that anger, turn it around, and use it against the people who would not find fault in Derek Chauvin and what he's done. David Chauvin, I'm sorry, I said Derek. David Chauvin and what he has done by keeping his knee on her uncle Perry's, George Perry Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds while he asked for his life, while he continued in the spirit of Eric Garner to say, I can't breathe. So shout out to that young woman for not deciding that she has to be humble and gracious and forgiving. We are not a forgiving people. We are a tolerable people. And I think our tolerance has run out. George Floyd's funeral was paid for by Mayweather. I'm not a fan of Mayweather for obvious reasons, not because 50 Cent said he was illiterate, but and 50 Cent, bless his heart, while he going around talking about people, he couldn't even get George Floyd's name together, but that's all I'm gonna say about that. He did pay for the funeral services, and he paid for the funeral services. The casket alone, the gold casket that they buried Mr. Floyd in, was somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000. So he not only paid for the services and moving the body from Minneapolis to Houston, but he paid for the venue and the horse-drawn carriage as the protesters walked with Mr. Floyd's body as they began to go to the gravesite and lay him to rest. So shout out to Mayweather, who actually did something this time right, other than just showing us he got stacks of money and very ugly Louis Vuitton jackets. Shout out to Floyd Mayweather. I also want to speak just very briefly about Miss Sissy, which was Mr. Floyd and the family of Floyd's mother. Her sister spoke out. We heard Mr. Floyd call for his mother as he was crossing over to the other side. I believe he saw his mother in his last moments here before he transitioned. But I want to say something that white America continues to talk about. They keep calling her Miss Sissy, and look, we all in Black America, we know about that. So y'all can quit trying to educate us. Talk to your homies and your neighbors. But stop trying to educate us about how everyone felt comfortable there and felt like that was a home. Because that's what Black folks been doing since we were on the plantation. We've been feeding, clothing, and seeing about one another in rare fashion. So there are Miss Sissies throughout the United States, and I'd like to say the world. There's some Miss Sissies in Africa. There are some Miss Sissies in Australia. The Aborigines people in Australia are just now starting to get there. Just do. They are starting out to be recognized. They were the native people to that land before Europeans decided to come to that land and take it over and claim it as theirs. Shout out to Africa. They know what that's like. So there are Miss Sissies throughout. In honor of Miss Sissy, I am going to say that Mr. Floyd's life, and even in his death, is going to be recognized because it has been the culminating factor to bring us together. So we cannot pay homage to Mr. Floyd and all of the Floyds out there. I named several of them at the start of this show because there's a Miss Sissy in every one of those Black children that have been murdered. You know, I found out some things about George Floyd that I did not know. I did not know that he was a rapper, and that after he spent some time in jail, he came out and he worked with DJ Screw. Shout out to DJ Screw, who is known for the Houston Screwed and Chop music. Now, it wasn't my thing. And I had opportunity to meet DJ Screw a couple of times. But I do recognize that what he did was he changed music. He owned it, and it became a staple of Houston's music scene. So I want to recognize DJ Screw in this. And so Floyd, Mr. Floyd was working with DJ Screw at one time, the Screwed and Chop music, and was a very talented rapper. Those are the things that happens when they snuff out our life and they don't allow us to fulfill the prophecies of our lives. We don't really get a chance to hear about his Houston music contributions. Well, not only did he have a Houston music contribution, he had a Christian music contribution, and he worked with with rapper Reconcile. And so he was huge on the Christian rap music scene. He was working with the Disciple Ministry in Minnesota. So when I start to talk about the prophecy of fulfilling this man's life, I think that George Floyd's contribution in his mere 47 years, and I have really 46 years. I have really taken this to heart because my birthday was May 25th. And while this man was taking his last breath, I was celebrating my 48th birthday. His life was a 360 view of who we are as a people. He had turned his life around. He was embarking upon a new life. His girlfriend, Courtney Ross, who we haven't seen much of, was talking about how he planned to open a restaurant. But the contributions that he made was he had turned his life around, was dedicating his life and his talent to the Most High God as a believer and saying this is what God had done in his life and turning him around. But Mr. Floyd was also helping change lives because he was sharing his story. So this man was more than somebody who they decided had a $20 counterfeit bill. George Perry Floyd was a man who had turned his life around for the better, and not just for the better of him, but for the betterment of people that look like him, who understood his walk coming out of the projects in the 3rd Ward of Houston, Texas, who had used his talent to bring people not only joy, but to the Most High God. And I think that when Mr. Chauvin decided, not Officer Chauvin, because he ain't gonna never be an officer again. Y'all see how pitiful he looked? He looked real pitiful. Look, he was gonna cry a little bit. I guess the Klan ain't in the county jail there in Minnesota. He ain't got no help. I don't know. What I do know is that he looked sad, like he wanted somebody to take their knee off of his neck. And so Chauvin stopped this man from breathing, but certainly did not stop him from his legacy, did not stop him from his prophecy being fulfilled, and he did not stop him from turning around the world. Because even as things erupted throughout the world, they erupted in Berlin, Germany. And in Berlin, Germany, they now have a bill against anti-discrimination of all state authorities, including police authorities. And now in Berlin, come on, Mr. Floyd. Now in Berlin, there is a thought that now you can take legal action against policing authorities there in Berlin, something that had not been done before, because before you had to prove that it was discrimination. Now, under this new law, under the anti-discrimination law, they have to prove or refute that it was not discrimination. It is thought that it is discrimination because of the virtue of you saying it is. And that is something that has not happened even in this country. So when we start talking about what has happened with Mr. Floyd, watch out, world. Mr. Floyd is speaking from the grave and he is not done. Like countless others. I don't know why Mr. Floyd was the one, for those of you that are believers and know the Bible, to be our David. However, his life has so much more meaning in his death because he was already doing the good work. That's all I'm going to say. I know I'm not supposed to be talking about the Lord because black folks are against that. It's so many of you that are woke and the black intelligentsia. I'm not supposed to say that, but I am a believer in the Most High God, and I see his hand moving. Now, this show is not a church show. It's just a real show, and so we're going to move on. I want to drop this. When we started talking about Courtney Ross, we were talking about she is a white woman, and I was wondering if perhaps when we saw the picture of Mr. Floyd working in the club as he worked for security, and he had several white young women with him. There's nothing inappropriate about that picture, so I'm not going to. I don't even want somebody to suggest that. He was just taking a picture, like we take pictures. And their club had several nights. So like clubs anywhere, you had your night where it was mostly Caucasian music played. So that's who shows up. You had R&B night. Who shows up? Black folks. You had Latin night. Who shows up? Latinos and Latinas. So Mr. Floyd took a picture. But it struck me with him being engaged to Courtney Ross, who is a Caucasian woman, if part of what Chauvin's anger towards him, because I believe that there was something else other than this alleged $20 bill. I'm wondering if he was mad at him because he was dating a white woman or he was getting attention from white women. Was it jealousy? I'm curious to see how this all plays out because it is certainly more to the story. All right. Listen, I want us to have a real conversation about defunding the police. I want us to have a conversation because I didn't really quite know what that meant. When I thought of defunding the police, I thought of taking the money away from the police and putting it into other resources in Black communities, because that's kind of what we were saying. We were talking about putting it in parks. I know even there's a stretch of land very close to my house, and my children were saying it would be a great place for a park. And what I don't understand is when we put parks in areas, especially here, we put parks in areas and then they're for little bitty kids. Well, when your kid turns 8, 9, 10 years old, there's nothing for them to do. We need basketball courts that are real well lit, batting cages, walking trails. We need all of that in one place. And we need it in a place that's in neighborhoods, not where you have to travel long distances. So when they started talking about that, I said, well, that's not a bad idea, but I really want to talk about policing as a whole in the United States. And policing was not our idea. So in my research, y'all know I love history. In my research, I found out that there were ancient police in China, and that the law enforcement in ancient China was carried out by what they call perfects, which were thousands of years. It's been developed in the Chu and Jin kingdoms. And if you know anything about Chinese history, it talks about in the spring and in the autumn periods. But it stretched across the nation of China, and it was really higher authorities like governors who were turned to by the emperors to kind of create a system that oversaw civil administration. So really it was to help if you had issues and how to get to court. Policing then was to facilitate a way for your voice to be heard and for you to get justice. It was not police like we think. So our court system is an example of what policing was in ancient China. When we look at ancient Egypt, which was a system that we created because Egypt was a part of Africa. Don't let them fool you. They try to do that all the time. And so we see evidence that it existed as far as back as the Old Kingdom, which would have been in the first the first kingdoms where you were able to see a system of civilization and how it worked from a culture aspect and citizenship. And so the records indicate that there was a judge, commandment of police dating back to the fourth dynasty and the fifth dynasty. And at the end of the Old Kingdom period, officers were armed with wooden sticks, were tasked with guarding public places, such as markets and temples and parks, and apprehending criminals. Okay, so this is where it starts getting this. I'll stay with you. The Persian Empire had a well organized police force. It existed in every place that was considered important. So any place that they felt that people needed governance, that's where they place these policemen, if you will. And each ward was under the command of the superintendent of police. It was expected to command implicit obedience of subordinates and police officers who acted as prosecutors and carried out punishments imposed by the court. So if something was supposed to happen with this particular person and it came out through the courts, the police was to ensure that that actually took place. And they were required to know court procedure. That's why I think it's interesting. And for prosecuting cases and accused and advancing accusations. So you find police. I remember years ago, a friend of mine had been living with her boyfriend. The house was in her name. He didn't really have mail there. His mail still went to his mother's house, and he had moved out. Now, in the state of Texas, if you live with one another in 6 months, you are considered common law, and you can file for divorce in divorce court. It's common law marriage. All right, so he had been living there over 6 months. Well, he came in and he took jet skis and some other things, and she called the police. And the police officers, unlike these Persian emperor police officers, did not know the law and told her that he lived there, and so therefore he could remove things from the house. Now he had been gone for over 30 days, was not on the mortgage. He cannot establish that he had paid any bills there, and all his mail was still going to his mother's house. They were incorrect. He did not have the right to remove anything. So unlike Persians police, a lot of times police officers giving advice, they don't know the court system, they don't know the law. All they know is who to cuff and stuff, and they run around here trying to tell people what to do. Now, let's talk about ancient Greece very briefly. Ancient Greece had publicly owned slaves, and they were used by the magistrates as police. So the police were actually enslaved people. And in Athens, there was a group of about 300 slaves that used to guard public meetings and keep order and for crowd control. The slaves. And they were assisted in dealing with criminals, handling prisoners, and making arrests. Other duties were associated with modern policing, such as investigating crimes, and which had previously been left to the citizens themselves. Sparta had a secret police force, and it existed to watch large populations of helots and other slaves. Now, isn't that interesting? Because when we start talking about modern policing in the United States, it originated because they needed someone to watch the slaves. So you had your managers on the plantation, but you also had something called paddy rollers, which were the term that the slaves used for them. And they were organized groups of armed white men who monitored and enforced discipline among black slaves in the antebellum South. The slave patrols functions to police slaves, especially runaways and defiant slaves. They also formed river patrols to prevent the escape by boat. Slave patrols were first established in South Carolina in 1704. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation was not signed until November of 1863. So they have had their way with bringing out policing, if you will, for almost 100 years. And they were organized in 1704. So they had been doing it. But South Carolina thought they would organize them, which means pay them for that specific role. Now, after 1704, it spread throughout the colonies, and fugitive slave laws helped enforce the necessity for slave patrols to abide by the law. Although these laws were initially created to keep tensions low between the North and South, well, that's not what happened. And it caused a physical formation of slave patrols. So our policing comes from the existence of, after the war, these paddy rollers were no longer getting paid. They could not enforce these fugitive slave laws. And so they then turned into these rural squads that ultimately turned into the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan started in 1865 and they popped up all over the United States from 1865 to 1877. Y'all stay with me. The Emancipation Proclamation was signed what year? 1863. So you had this old style of petty rollers now forming up in Ku Klux Klan, organized fraternal orders to monitor and watch Black people as they began to form places like Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, all over the United States. So now we have the Ku Klux Klan, and let's talk about this a little bit. The Ku Klux Klan, that word was derived from a word called Kyklos, which means circle, and then the Scottish Gaelic word meaning clan. So they just reached and got some other stuff and put it together. I mean, I'm not hating on that. I guess Greeks do that too, to a degree. And under this platform, it was a philosophized white racial superior. The group employed violence as a means of pushing back Reconstruction. Though now, while Black folks are rising up from the Civil War being won by the North, the Emancipation Proclamation being signed, 2 years later, we start getting the Ku Klux Klan, and then they start to rise up against Reconstruction and the enfranchisement of Black people. So these petty rollers are now in the Ku Klux Klan. They're angry. They're not getting jobs. They have no skill set because instead of learning how to do agriculture and textile like they did in the North, because listen, slaves were used for textile in the North as well. They were supposed to be treated better, but there were slaves in the North. Don't let them fool you. Chicago was created by a Black man who went as far as he could go before he got to Canada and liked to froze to death. Chicago is a Black city because it was formed by a Black man, but we'll have to talk about that. That's a talk show for a different day with all the corruption that goes on. All right, in Chicago, created by a Black man. So now listen, that is how modern policing was formed, from the petty rollers to the Ku Klux Klan to the fraternal order of police that we see today. That same philosophy, that Klan philosophy, is what drives the knee on our necks, the chokeholds, the shooting of Trayvon Martin, the shooting of Tamir Rice. That same philosophy, because keep in mind, even though George Zimmerman was not a police officer, he was a flashlight cop, and he had designated and deemed himself to be such. He wanted to be a police officer. So this philosophy is derived from this same policing thought. It even exists in our school system. One of the school board members here was talking about what they should do when they're talking about defunding the police. And we're going to really break down what defunding the police is, because I was really confused about what that meant. But I did a quick search, and the Urban Institute says that 67% of all students in the United States attend a school with police officers in it. But what I thought was even more telling is we have 10 million police in schools throughout the nation and no social workers. We have 3 million police in schools with no nurses. We have 6 million police in schools with no psychologists. And so when we start to look at the disparities between Blacks and whites, it starts with the school to prison pipeline. Shout out to Judge Amber Givens, who actually has a whole system in which she utilizes through her courts to fight against the school to prison pipeline. So listen, when we start breaking this down, I also want to give a shout out to LeBron James, King James. I always call him King James because he operates like a king. There is now a coalition for athletes with activism to stop voter suppression. So I want to give a shout out to LeBron. He's constantly making it happen, speaking his platform, using his voice with no fear, unapologetically Black. And I'm loving everything about it. I'm here for it. 20% of poor Blacks versus 20% of poor whites equals 20% of Blacks end up in prison with only 6% of whites. That starts from schools tracking you. So the police officers are not only tracking you, but You're also finding that police officers are tracking you. So in the cumulative form, they write down your test scores and that kind of thing. And they have linked low test scores, low academic performance to prison. Well, police officers are also keeping that kind of thing with these youth action police officers in the schools. So when we're talking about policing, are they seeing our children as threats? You know, Hillary Clinton, during the passing of the 1994 crime bill that Joe Biden sponsored, she called our children super predators. I've had a lot of people jump on me, a couple of my sorority sisters jump on me about how that bill was useful and necessary and how they were really talking about gang members and drug dealers. But we have not talked about the circumstances in which those people exist. And so to call children super predators, I have a problem with it. But, you know, we're not really talking about them. It's an aside. So when we're looking at police officers in the school, their perception of Black people, the Ku Klux Klan, the patty rollers, and how that culminates into the fraternal order of police that is governing bodies of law enforcement in city municipalities. And we're not talking about county sheriffs and law enforcement from city, county, and state may differ under their name, but it all culminates under one umbrella and one philosophy in which it originates, and that is the patty rollers and then the Ku Klux Klan. According to the Marshall Project, there are societal norms that exist within the police from that trickle-down philosophy I just explained, that they are to keep racial order. And so it explains why Amy Cooper felt like she could call the police on Christian Cooper, a Yale graduate, I will add, because he was asking her to put her dog on the leash. This is far greater from a societal norm that white people are allowed. It is acceptable for them to call the police on Black people, regardless of what the Black person is actually doing, because the police in their white minds are to keep racial order. And that stems from the plantation. So speaking of Yale, because he's a Yale grad, the Yale Law Journal article states that 3% of the entire Florida police force has been terminated or resigned in lieu of termination because of police misconduct. So we saw in Mcatee where the police officer tackled a young girl, 15 years old, in her swimming suit. And he resigned and then got another job at another police agency. Well, that's what happened. It happened in the case of Tamir Rice, the young boy who was shot and killed within 3 seconds of the police coming into the situation, seeing him and him being laid dead in the snow after being shot. That was Timothy Lohman. Timothy Lohman had been on the police force for about 2 years in Cleveland. Prior to him being on the police force in Cleveland, Ohio, he had been in Independence, Ohio, which is a suburb about 13 miles away from Cleveland. He actually resigned in Independence, Ohio, prior to being fired. They were firing him for misconduct and said that he was unfit for police duty when he was hired by the Cleveland Police Department. There is this notion that they can just drop it here and pick it up elsewhere. And there are no ramifications for that. There's no stopping them from being hired in another place. I bring up Florida in particular when I told you about 3% of all of Florida's police. So it doesn't matter if it's a city, municipality, or county or state police agency. 3% of all of them have been found to be unfit by one police department and then transferred to another one within the state. And sometimes they come from out of the state and then they take the test and then they are allowed to practice or be a police officer in that new state. So when we're looking at the numbers, it's about 100, roughly a little less than 147,000 police officers in Florida. So that's 1,500, 1,600 police officers in the state of Florida have already been deemed unfit by some other policing agency. And they're just riding around stopping Black folk, stopping Hispanic folk, stopping anybody they don't like. because there's already been a trend set that they can do it and get away with it. Well, Florida. Focusing on Florida. I used to live in Florida. I used to live in Duval County, Jacksonville, Florida. Good people there. But I remember my dad visiting one time told me these black folks down here don't even know they've been freed. Because there's this notion in Florida that black people are should and could, can and will be treated according to the police officer or white people in general's discretion, however they feel when they wake up that morning. In Broward County, Florida, the chapter of Fraternal Order of Police posted a message on Facebook. Don't y'all just love Facebook? And said, "We're hiring." He was making reference to the Buffalo 57. So in Buffalo, New York, there was a protest rally against the senseless death of George Floyd. And a 75-year-old elderly man stumbled. He kind of tripped into the police. So then he touched the man, and you see him kind of brushing his hand off. And I'm sure it was just like a joking gesture. Well, the man pushed him, and he fell straight back. Now your president, the orangutan, said that he was making fun and lost his footing. No, he's 75. He's not as stable on his feet. He had just stumbled and fell and was trying to catch himself. And I believe he was kind of trying to grab hold to the police officer and then decided, oh, let me just brush him off. I don't mean any harm. When he pushed him, he fell straight back. I have a father that's 85. They are not always sure-footed. So when he fell, he hit his head. The other police officer reached down, if you watch the video, to pick him up to see about him. And the police officer that shoved him, gathered him and kind of, no, let him stay down there and bleed. Well, Broward County told those police officers, because 57 of them have decided, because those two police officers were put on administrative paid leave, that while they investigate, 57 of them resigned from the emergency response team, in solidarity with them against them being put on paid administrative leave. He was telling them, we're hiring in Broward County. In addition, now he doesn't discriminate. So it's not like he'll take white cops over black cops. He'll take any cop with any kind of misdeeds or misconduct, any kind. He said, he's also talking to the Atlanta Six. Now the Atlanta Six were fired. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms fired them. You had 6 police officers that stopped and accosted Atlanta college students when they were leaving a protest and pulled them out of their cars. And they have 5 of those 6 on felony charges for excessive force. Broward County said, we're hiring. So with that being said, there's a lot of things going on throughout the nation. New York, and they're just waiting on Governor Andrew Cuomo to sign this bill into law. They are repealing 50A, which allows law enforcement to shield police misconduct records from the public. Well, that's extraordinary, because now if you have an excessive force or police brutality lawsuit, the defense counsel can actually see that record and see if there is misconduct. Now, here's what I think we need to do when we start talking about the defunding the police. And defunding the police actually means that they're looking at not just defunding the police from an aspect of redirecting the money, because that is one aspect. I talked about it earlier when we were talking about pulling money away, putting it into Black communities. It can also be for reform, or it can be dismantling the police altogether, like they did in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm not sure how I feel about that, to be honest, because in Minneapolis, they're saying they're looking to employ public safety officers, which will be made up of social workers and counselors. We do need trained police officers to help govern us. We do need police officers to be able to assess situations and know when to draw their gun. When we got Congress in Kente Cloth Congress signed a bill into law. Now, mind you, it has a lot of tenets and tones of the 2014 bill that they tried to get passed when Eric Garner was choked to death. And that bill now says that they will not allow any chokeholds. Their no-knock warrants will be banned, and that they will also not allow excessive force or deadly force, I should say, unless it's absolutely necessary. Now, I have not read the bill, but I do question, what does that mean, necessary? Like, that's a subjective word. And I know that the Supreme Court has allowed police officers throughout this nation, as it is the supreme law of the land, to simply say, I feared for my life. Remember when Daquan was killed in Chicago, and the police officer said he feared for his life? Now, his partner said, well, no, I did not see a threat. He did not pose a threat to me in that same way. But the Supreme Court has said that they get qualified immunity. And that's why it's so difficult to sue police officers and police departments. And for criminal. Now, civil, yes, there's money going out all the time. It's like a fire hydrant. It's going out all the time within civil cases, but to criminalize the behavior of shooting and killing us and being able to get away with it is far more difficult, because the Supreme Court has allowed this qualified immunity, which speaks as to why it is so easy for police officers to say, I fear for my life, and to get away with it. Now, we're seeing a trend shift right here in Dallas with the Botham Jean case. But 10 years, Jordan Edwards, the young boy, 15 years old, who was killed by the police officer, and that police officer got 15 years in prison. So this fear for your life kind of thing, now it's being evaluated on a metric. So I'm wondering if this bill encompasses an actual rubric that says how it goes from deadly force in a believable sense that's logical and reasonable and prudent, and then not. So we got Congressman Kente Clough. They're doing big things. This is sweeping legislation. But, we've been trying to get legislation in some part in this same manner since the Carter administration. So I think it's a tremendous thing. And we just have to keep in mind what exactly that means when we're passing this kind of legislation on a national scale. But then there have been several cities that have passed some form of de-escalating or allowing the police to be able to have so much power and authority, in a sense. Now, Minneapolis, Minnesota they kind of went a little above board, if you ask me, in a sense, but because I'm not quite sure what that means when you start to look at counselors and social workers. Yes, we do need counselors and social workers on the police force to go out when there is a mental health check, mental health call, someone who has been, when they're describing to 911 that this person has mental health issues. You do need social workers, you do need psychologists, but I don't know that policing should be left up to them. I think the same way we put a lot of onus on police to understand and handle every single thing that goes on, I don't think that we should be doing that with public safety officers. I think there should be the accompaniment of the two, the social worker or the psychologist or the counselor with the police officers given the call. I certainly don't think it should be left up to them completely. And so we're going to have to really look at what that means. But, when we start talking about taking down the power and the authority of policing in this country, we are also to have been talking about what that means to de-escalate, what it means to stop racial profiling. That's one of the things they did in Germany, what I mentioned earlier, how they have disallowed racial profiling. So it comes in its degrees and variances of it. What I think we need to do is take a good hard look. If we're going to defund the police, we need to take a good hard look at police unions. And they operate as independent bodies within the police department. And I'm saying within. They say they're separate and apart. I can tell you, Mcatee, the Dallas Police Association, they're not separate and apart. And police unions have all of this bargaining power. It's not just a collective bargaining agreement with dealing with pay and comp time and overtime and hours, which is really what police unions should be doing. It's more about hiring, promotions of supervisors and managers. It is about allowing the unions to have a say in hiring police chiefs. They have a lot of power. And so when Mcatee came to Amber Geiger's rescue the night she shot and killed Botham Jean, murdered him, because a jury of her peers said that she murdered him, and she is now serving 10 years for his murder. I believe they're currently working on an appeal and they're trying to get her out. So we'll have to see how much time she actually serves. But he was there present as the president of the police union, making sure that he provided her counsel. The counsel that she got, the lawyers that provided her defense were paid for by the Dallas Police Association. These associations have a lot of power. Now, I'm not sure they get any money from the city through the police department, because then they are not operating as an independent agency. You pay dues to any union, and then that union represents you. They're supposed to be representing union stuff, pay, comp time, not hiring and firing, which is exactly what they do. And there have been several mayors that have spoken out that say that the police unions are responsible for, after they fire someone, getting them rehired through the contract and the collective bargaining agreements that have been signed between the police agents and the police unions and the police departments. So they have far too much power. And I think if we're going to defund the police and we're going to reform the police, then we have to really seriously look at the power that is wielded by these police unions. You know, some of the things that we've talked about in dismantling the police altogether, and I mentioned Minneapolis. Some of the things that we talk about with legislation, we talked about before with Congress, Kente Cloth. I'm just going to call them Kente Cloth Congress now. I mean, I just feel like it fits. We're talking about body cameras and how we got a stipend under Obama's administration, where all of these police agencies or police departments were able to get stipends from the government to purchase body cameras. But this reform that we've already talked about, this reform that's already supposed to be in place, hasn't worked very well, because Breonna Taylor, when they served a no-knock warrant and shot and killed her while she sleeps in her bed, they had body cameras. When they killed David Mcatee, the barbecue man who was loved in Louisville, Kentucky, the same place Breonna Taylor was killed, they weren't on. There was no legislation tied to the stipend or the money that they received. And so we start talking about de-escalation of the police. Well, we've been talking about that. They were talking about diversity, no racial profiling. All of these things have been done. In fact, there's a man that goes around and teaches police officers that you better be ready to kill. And if you're not ready to kill, then you shouldn't be on this job. That's one of the things that he says in his training. A Florida police chief said if they decide in Florida they're no longer going to allow police officers to get paid for going to those trainings and paying for those trainings where you got to be ready to kill, then he is going to suggest they do it on their own time, and he's going to be the first one to do it. See what I'm talking about? Petty rollers. We talk about better recruitment and incentives for police. We've already tried that. It does not work. So I'm not saying that defunding the police is definitely going to work. I am saying if you want something you've never had, you have to do something you've never done. That's what I'm saying. So to that end, I'm sorry, y'all. To that end, we need something other than just what we've already got, which is murder. We've tried these other things and we've gotten murder. So maybe defunding the police, in a way, maybe defunding the police means that instead of allowing them money to buy military weapons that have been deemed obsolete or discontinued or surplus by the United States military, and allowing police officers or policing agencies to buy these military weapons, because we got police departments now in the United States that have tanks. Why do you need tanks? Why would the Dallas Police Department, for instance, or the DeSoto Police Department, or Yonkers, New York, why would they need a tank? I mean, if you have something going on, you call the National Guard. They have access to tanks. They're United States military. Why would you need tanks? Maybe we need to stop that, and we need to start putting money into more wraparound services in our police department. And maybe that's what it looks like. Maybe the thing that New York has done and repealed 50A, where you get to see if there's misconduct in their records, maybe that needs to be open so that we can all see. Maybe that aspect of defunding the police is realistic and something that we can get behind. I don't know about replacement of police officers with social workers and counselors. That makes me a little nervous because I don't want a psychologist over here if somebody breaks in my house. I want the police. If there's a rapist on the loose, I do not want somebody to sit down and try to talk to the rapist. I want you to stop the rapist. So I'm not sure what that looks like. I do know that the way policing works in the United States does not work. In fact, in Germany, and I talked about it before, in Berlin, there's a professor named Kirsten who is a professor at the German police university, who said that racial profiling started when they started to look at racial profiling and how the police were using it as a mode of policing, if you will. They started looking at that early in 1947, and it ran through the mid 1970s because it was an inner working to stop that line of thinking. But he did say, but he has no idea if their way of doing it would work when we're talking about policing people who have at one time been enslaved. So what he was speaking to is the philosophy, this patty roller philosophy, when we start to look at other countries and what they've done. I don't know if you guys knew this, but Amazon has facial recognition software, and they've been allowing police agencies to use it. So they're now calling on a 1-year moratorium, and they're no longer going to allow police officers to use this facial recognition software. And they're doing it for 1 year to give Congress an opportunity to evaluate. But the facial recognition software has a lot of problems. It cannot distinguish nor differentiate between young children, women, and you guessed it, people of color. And that is something that they have been using. So when they are looking for me and they arrest someone on the other part of town who they say looks like me, and they're using facial recognition, and they're saying in court, when they use the facial recognition software, like a fingerprint will have like 32 points, and that's how they decide this is definitely your fingerprint, and it's 99%. They're looking the same way at facial recognition, the points that they use. So these points could be off because it doesn't recognize people of color in the same way. Apple had a lot of problems with their software, people of color. If I have a friend and she's about my complexion and has an oval face, she can open my phone. It's the same kind of thing. Their software is not designed to recognize people who are not Caucasian and do not have Caucasian, I guess characteristics is the best way to put that. Let's talk about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She says that Mark Zuckerberg is protecting white supremacists on Facebook. Oh, shocker. I can tell you, I have personally had problems with Facebook cutting me off and not allowing me to speak, or stopping me when I was on Fishbowl Radio Network, which is it's a media company now. Shout out to Fishbowl. That they would stop me. And I really felt like it was what I was saying. Well, I delved a little deeper, and Facebook has allowed Rush Limbaugh, the right-wing extremist, to continue to have a page and share on Facebook. Louis Farrakhan is not on Facebook. They kicked him off, but they allowed Rush Limbaugh. When Twitter came out against Donald Trump, the orangutan run 3 ring circus from the Oval Office, he actually came out and said that he didn't believe that Twitter should flag Trump's speech or his tweets. Trump said something that was just vehemently out of order, untrue. It was a lie. I don't know why I'm trying to be nice. It was a lie. And they flagged it. It was about voter suppression. And he was saying that mail-in ballots would afford the Democrats to steal the vote, and it was voter suppression for the Republicans. Not true. There's no evidence that Democrats have had a hand in stealing elections. It is true for the Republicans, but it's not true necessarily for Democrats. I'm not saying Democrats don't steal the elections. I'm just simply saying the evidence leans towards the Republicans, not the Democrats. And they're scared of mail-in ballots because those persons who would typically maybe not vote, if they have the luxury of voting, would vote from home. And so that allows more people to vote. Democrat in Arizona, for instance, 77,000 felons are now able to vote. Shout out to Arizona legislature. Woo-hoo! 77,000. We're probably looking at a Democratic vote out of the majority of that 77,000. So that is what they're afraid of. So when Trump made this statement that was just a lie, Twitter flagged it. Twitter was like, well, Mark Zuckerberg said he disagreed with that. He was not going to do that, and that it was free speech. Well, here's the thing about free speech. Under the First Amendment, you do have free speech. However, the Supreme Court has said you cannot cry fire in a crowded theater and allow people to get trampled, harmed, maimed, or killed. You're not allowed to do that with your speech. So there are limitations on free speech. So I'm not quite sure what Marky Mark is talking about there. And she called him out on it. We'll see what happens. But what I can tell you is probably not. Listen, under the new legislation of Congress, Kente Cloth Congress, there's a lot of things that are happening. And I want to simply say, even though I've mocked it, even though I've said that I didn't necessarily like Congress with all of them, Nancy Pelosi just looked visibly uncomfortable to me. Now, I'm talking about before she kneeled. I'm sure it was uncomfortable. Those floors are hard. Some of them had something a little padding under their knee. And I respect the solidarity and the message they were trying to send. I actually think the CBC led them astray. I understand that the Congressional Black Caucus does wear kente cloth. Black folks doing that because that's what the Congressional Black Caucus is. It's Black people wearing ancestral garb, kente cloth. I get it, a show of solidarity with them, but to me it looked a little gimmicky. Other people have said pandering. I didn't think it looked like pandering. It just kind of looked kind of hokey and gimmicky to me, and I thought it was unnecessary. But I get the message. I don't think the message should overshadow the legislation. And so I felt compelled to say that because I've gotten into a couple of fights. That's what I think, and I'm entitled to my opinion. Well, when I'm talking about policing and we're talking about defunding the police or reforming the police, what that looks like, I don't know if we actually need to completely disband police departments throughout the nation and start all over, although that is a thought and that has been said, not just by me. Because I want to talk about perception. Do you all remember the young Bridgeport, Connecticut mom who, I think she was 27 at the time, was arrested for first-degree larceny, and she was actually charged with stealing an education for her young 7-year-old son? Do y'all remember that? She was homeless in Bridgeport, used the babysitter that kept her son, used her address. Now, the mom and the son were living in her van, in her car. And she was arrested and charged and sentenced to 5 years in prison. When we start talking about perception, I can't help but bring up the actress Felicity Huffman, the one that's married to H. Macy. He is her husband. He's a big actor. He's the actor in Shameless, that Showtime show. She was sentenced after she pled guilty to stealing an education on a university level and bribing her child's way into college. She was sentenced to 14 days in community service. 14 days and community service. Of the 14 days, I believe she served 11, or 10 and a half to be exact, because she didn't even serve the full 11 days. When we are talking about policing in this country, then we also have to look at our court system. And I don't know that we can have sweeping legislation or reform. And I am not crapping on the legislation that was recently passed by Congress that now has to go to the Senate. The Senate is a Republican Senate, and they have been said to be working on their own legislation that Kamala Harris and Cory Booker have presented. I don't know why they have to present their own legislation, why they couldn't work directly with Congress to make sure that the legislation that Congress passed and then sent to the Senate, so it ultimately then goes on to the orangutan's desk for signature into law. I'm not sure why they could not work in concert to have one bill. But with that being said, I am not crapping on it at all. I want to be very clear about that. I am ecstatic that Congress has moved swiftly. They have looked at what needs to be done, and they are making a very reasonable attempt to get something on the books that stops what we have been seeing. So I want to be really clear about that. However, I also want to talk about the fact that without sweeping reform of the court system and the disparities and the biasness in courts, where judges get to make discretion in state courts about how they treat us, the difference between this young woman, Tanya McDowell, sentenced to 5 years for stealing an education, and Felicity Huffman for bribing and lying Hope Child's way into school, into college. I don't know how we're going to have any reform without seriously looking at that. I don't know how you can have police reform without seriously having court system, judicial reform. I want to take a quick moment right now to give a shout out to Dominique Alexander and the Next Generation Action Network and all of the civil rights activists that are currently working in the city of Dallas, where I live. I want to give a shout out and a humble thank you to all of the civil rights activists throughout the nation. I want to give a shout out to Seattle, Washington, who is now doing a sit-in, and that's the kind of protest that we need. I want to specifically say, humbly, thank you to John Cruzo, who is the district attorney in the city of Dallas, who I have been critical of, but I've also continued to say he got it right. If you remember a couple of weeks ago, Chief Renee Hall, y'all know I do it every time, actually had the protesters that were on the Margaret Hunt Bridge. It made national news. They used gas bombs and sponge bullets to control the crowd after they entrapped them. And I'm using that word specifically because the protesters were told to go up the bridge, and then they cornered them off, blocked them from going on to Trinity Groves, where I think they stopped them because they believed that something could happen to that area, which is frequently visited by white Dallasites and others. And so they wanted to stop them. They cited 674 people with breaking the curfew ordinance. That case has been dropped by DA Cruzo, and the Next Generation Action Network with, I'm sure, attorney Kim T. Cole, so shout out to her, was able to get that dropped for almost 700 people. It never should have happened. That's all I'm saying. Regardless of who's at fault, regardless of the fact that they said Dominique led them there, regardless of that, those other people were following, and they should not have been cited at all. And then to the, I believe, 84 people that were actually arrested and jailed and spent the night in jail, DA Cruzo got it right. And that's why it's so important. Okay, a lot of people are going to stop listening to me now. That's why it's so important for us to vote, because we voted John Cruzo into office. That's all I'm saying about that, because I don't like to talk about voting. I am going to also talk about this Ohio GOPer, Senator Dr. Steve Huffman. He is a medical doctor. When I start to talk about perceptions, Black people are dying at an alarming rate, especially when we look at COVID-19 numbers versus our white counterparts. They were actually having a discussion with the Commission on Minority Health. This is perception. So I don't know how we change the overall perception for policing, judicial systems, health. Senator Steve Huffman spoke asking Angela Dawson, who is the Black woman who was speaking on behalf of the commission, and he wanted to know, and I'm quoting here what he said. He said, "Could it just be that African Americans the colored population, color, color. Remember, no colors. We see it above water fountains and over doors. Perception said, is it that they just do not wash their hands as well as other groups? So now we don't know how to wash our hands. Is it that they don't wear a mask? To be honest, and I don't mean no disrespect, I know out here in these Dallas COVID streets, I've seen far more white people out here raw dog in the air than black people. That's all I'm saying about that. Or do they not distance themselves? So we don't know what 6 feet. We don't have sense enough to know what 6 feet is either. We can't wash our hands. We don't know how to wear masks, and we don't know how to distance ourselves. And could that just explain, or could that not be the explanation for why there's a higher incidence? Well, Angela Dawson was not about to get into that foolishness, and she just said that, she basically said there's no indication in any health report that that would be the case. So then, true to form, there's backlash, and then he comes out and says, "You guessed it. Y'all are so smart, you melanated beauties." He then says, and I quote, "Regrettably, I asked a question in an unintentionally awkward way that was perceived as hurtful and was exactly the opposite of what I meant." This is when the violins kick in. "I was trying to focus on why COVID-19 affects people of color." Y'all are not colored anymore. Now you are people of color. "At a higher rate, since we do not know all of the reasons." And he was simply just offering reasons. That's all that was happening. A study of the Foundation of AIDS Research found that 50% of COVID-19 cases in the U.S. come from disproportionately Black counties, which also accounted for nearly 60% of the deaths from the virus. The research in the study pointed to structural racism as the cause for the alarming gap, not presumed personal behaviors of Black America. He questioned our hygiene. That is what that meant. Black people are nasty. That is what he was saying. We typically don't have cats walking across our counters either, but that's all I'm saying about that. Structured factors including healthcare access, density of households, unemployment, underemployment. I mean, we all know all the triggers and the stickers. So when we're talking about the police in particular, we are also talking about the societal norms that get an Amy Cooper to call the Karen Incorporated members, the Beckys that call about us swimming in the pools, playing in the parks, barbecuing. It's this perception, and that perception starts from segregation in a sense. It starts from segregation in a sense from not allowing us to be good enough to move to their neighborhoods. And so desegregation kept us in one place and them in another. But it also feeds racism. So the idea that you have to redline is fed by this societal norm, these structures of racism that allow the police to be the racial order law enforcement agencies. It is that mindset that stems from eons and ages of perception that is never dispelled. And I also hold the media 100% accountable. And so I started this show talking about talking about Cadillac. All of these statements are coming out now. We need them to make these statements, but we also need people to provide funding. So Starbucks is not allowing their baristas to wear Black Lives Matters paraphernalia because they don't want people to come into a Starbucks and feel uncomfortable. They came out with a statement when the two Black men were arrested while they were sitting in there waiting for another gentleman to join and so they could have a meeting. They came out with a statement, but that would have been the time to wear shirts that say Black Lives Matter. I'm not sure that a lot of these places get it. And even though I am extremely happy with all of the statements that have come out from Fortune 500 companies and the like, saying that they support the Black Lives Matters movement, what does that mean? Exactly. I think it's the Seattle Seahawks, where the chairman said that he is actively working with LeBron James. I mentioned earlier, athletes and activism, and he's talking to white America, saying pour money into organizations that are working for equity. I talked about it last week. We are not asking for equality. We're asking for equity. There is a tangible, monetized structure that tells you what equity is versus equality. Equality is subjective, and they can say this is as equal. So we are looking for equity. I think that that's great, but unless we change mindsets top down, so that Amy Coopers do not feel comfortable calling the police on black men who say, "Can you please put your dog on a leash?" I don't know that policing means they don't have the power that they once had. And I get that. And that's why we're looking for sweeping reform, dismantling, defunding. I get that. But the idea that Black people need some kind of racial order in order to keep them in their place is why we are in the state of Black emergency that we're in now. Um, Listen, there is so much um, going on that I talked about it before. If you're just joining, I talked about how June 4th of this year, Berlin was the first European country to pass anti-discrimination bill. I talked about how Congress in this country has passed a bill to stop police from doing chokeholds, which killed Eric Garner. Although it was not a chokehold that killed George Floyd. And I get the reason why they're talking about that, but it was perception that killed George Floyd, that it was okay to do what he was doing. You're just joining me a little after the 12 o'clock hour. I talked about specifically how there is this keeping the slaves in order mentality from the patty rollers that used to govern slaves and stop that, and slaves that were disobedient, not just runaway slaves. I mean, that's part of it, but a slave that may have had something to say on the plantation, a kind of Nat Turner kind of slave. They were the ones to keep them in order. I spoke earlier about Donald Trump specifically choosing Tulsa, Oklahoma to give his Juneteenth, Black Wall Street, FU Black America speech at a rally. These are the perceptions that fuel redlining, the disenfranchisement of Black people, not being able to live where you want to live, subprime loans that blew up in 2008, where Black people who actually had better credit than some of their white neighbors had higher loans, higher interest. You know, these are the things. And so when we start to really talk about policing in this country, we are talking about the allowance of mistreatment that stems from packing us like sardines in a slave ship through the middle passages and then dropping us off in different places, not just in the United States, but in the world. That is the perception that we have to work against. And so defunding the police very well may be what needs to happen. But when we're talking about defunding the police, what we're really talking about is not allowing them the opportunities legally to hurt us, kill us, disenfranchise us. And so I think we're at a good place and we're at a start, but we're certainly not where we should be. There is a book by Kristen Bell called "The World Needs More Purple People." I'm going to say this to all the good white. Thank you for speaking out. Thank you for coming on board and saying it's not right. Thank you for marching with us and protesting with us and standing in solidarity. Thank you for calling out the white supremacists. Thank you for saying, you know what, it's white people out here burning. Thank you. I need us to also not have to have these conversations with white people. It's exhausted. We are tired. We are worn down. We are threadbare. We don't have the wherewithal. I'm telling white America, the good white folk who are out there standing with the good black folk trying to make a change. I'm saying this to you. We don't want we don't want you to come and talk to us about Kaepernick. Thank you for getting it. Tell your white neighbor, your white coworker, your mom, your dad, your family members, the people you went to school with, tell them about Kaepernick. Tell them that it was never about the flag. Because when Tim Tebow did it, y'all celebrated him because he was protesting by taking a knee against abortion. Tell them that it was a Green Beret that told Kaepernick, instead of sitting on the bench during the national anthem, it would be more patriotic to take a knee. Tell them that. Have that discussion with them. I appreciate what Kristen Bell is trying to do now. She wrote this book before all this happened, but she wrote it in an era where we are seeing in social media all the time us being brutalized. So she said the world needs more purple people. It's a children's book. I have not read it. But I get the gist of it from her conversation with Gayle King. But again, I have not read it. This is what I'm going to say. The world does not need more purple people. The world needs more white people and people with influence and affluence to speak out against mistreatment, hatred, racism. That is what the world needs. The world needs for you to not talk about purple people, but talk about black people. Talk about the contributions of black people. Talk about the fact that y'all would be running into one another if it wasn't for a black man who invented the signal light. Talk about the fact that George Washington Carver, not only for the cotton gin to help black folks out, but peanut butter. Talk about that. Talk about the contributions that black people have made to the United States and the world. Talk about that. Talk about the fact that John Banneker was the first black president. Shout out to Obama, you second. John Banneker was the first black president and was elected by his peers prior to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. He was president before George Washington. Talk about that. Talk about the fact that we have contributed to building this nation. Talk about the fact that while you are celebrating the Lilly Ledbetter law signed into law by President Obama that said that women have to be paid as much as men, talk about the fact that while that is being celebrated, talk about the fact that black women do not get paid as much as white women oftentimes, that black men do not get paid as much as sometimes white women. Talk about that. Talk about the things that actually put disparities. When you talk about the kids at South Oak Cliff High School walking out because of asbestos. Why is there asbestos in any school in the 2000s? And why are you sending anybody's child there? Talk about that. That's what we need. We don't need a book about purple people. Kristen, God bless you. I know you're trying out there. Write a children's book about the contributions that black people made to this country and how white people didn't allow them to have it. Talk about Famous Amos cookies. Talk about Johnny Walker whiskey. Talk about the fact that black people have contributed in every single legislation that has been passed that allowed any group of people that felt like they were marginalized and were a minority. Talk about the fact that their walk was paid by the blood, by the sweat, and by the tears, the anguish, the angst, and trepidation of black people. Talk about lynchings. Talk about the Ku Klux Klan. Talk about the pantyhose. Talk about that. That is the book you need for children. If you want to change the perception of how we are viewed in this country, if you want to stop policing as it currently is in a judicial system that puts 21% of the 20% of poor blacks versus the 20% of whites in prison, then talk about those things. Not about a book about purple people. God bless you. I know you tried, but we got to get to the real, the heart of the matter. Talk about the fact that the United States of America assisted Jews persecuted through the Holocaust getting money from Germany that they get to this day. Talk about the fact that even though Joe Biden is saying that Black Americans and Native Americans deserve reparations, talk about the fact that the only race of people in this country that has truly been able to demonstrate wrongdoing by this country is African Americans, and they have never received a dime. I am going to post, I'm going to go back in this thread, I'm going to post it on my page. University of Massachusetts, UMass, has a timeline of all reparations paid out. All reparations paid out. All reparations paid out, and how Black people have never gotten one dime from this country. That is what we need you to talk about. I'm going to post the link so that everyone gets an opportunity to see it and share it. Because if we don't change the perception of how we are viewed in this country, and the fact that George Floyd had to die for Aborigines people, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that Aborigines people are now being able to be heard in Australia. If it takes a Trayvon and a Samir to get us where we need to be, then that's the conversation that needs to be had. Not just a children's book about purple people and how the world needs to see people as one. Because for so long, they have treated us, been put us in isolation, lied about us, where a senator who is a medical doctor says that we have poor hygiene and that is why we're contracting COVID-19 at a higher rate, and felt comfortable saying it. It's that's going to stop us from having a knee on our necks. It is that. If you need to tell a story about how once we were allowed to vote, they gave us a poll that we had to pay, or a literacy test, so that we could vote. That's why Arizona, I talked about it earlier, passing a law that says 77,000 felons can now vote. That stems from a poll tax. It stems from a literacy test where you disenfranchise Black people and people of color, and then you put them in prison, and then you take all their rights away, even though you say that is an opportunity for them to become rehabilitated. So if we're going to tell the real, we got to get real about what it means to defund, to reform, to stop policing in its current form. We got to get real about perceptions. We got to get real about why they treat us the way they do. We have to get real about intelligent white people being dumb enough to think that we have a hygiene problem where cats ain't walk across our counter. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to become emotional, but I am emotional about the treatment of my people. I am emotional about the fact that so many of you have contacted me about Candace Owens. I'm only going to talk about her one time and one time only, because I don't deal with con artists on my show. And so I don't talk about con artists. Give me a second, y'all. Let me get myself together. If I was at Fishbowl, I'd take a break. Okay. Candace Owens. Candace Owens sued the school district, and the NAACP defense fund came to her defense. I meant it just like I said it. And she sued them with the help of the NAACP, and it helped her win a racial discrimination lawsuit in 2007. And in 2007, She accused some boys of racially harassing and threatening to kill her. She claimed that the boys were the son of then Stanford Mayor Donald Malloy. Okay, so the Connecticut former governor, because the NAACP, Owens family, the NAACP, the Owens family received a settlement of $37,500 in 2007. And she sued the Stanford Public Schools. She, at one time, was the CEO of an anti-Trump liberal learning website called Degree 180. Okay. This woman has come out to say some horrible things. She has said some things about George Floyd. She said Arnaud Albery was a criminal. She's ignorant. She is also a pawn for white America to use. She is full of self-hate and blatant disregard for herself. So we should not have expectations of her. She was trying to fight the good fight, but it wasn't working. At the same time that she was doing this liberal learning website, it failed. She launched another one in 2015. And she was said that it was good news that the Republican Tea Party will eventually die off peacefully in their sleep, we hope. This is 2015 with the Candace Owens that's on your page on your web pages now, and y'all are talking about her. Listen, Black people, stop talking about it, because a lot of her views are from us and our just disdain for her and the dismay that we feel that this Black woman would decide that that's what she needs to say and do. Truthfully, I tell y'all all the time, a lot of times when Black folks sleep white, they think they're right. So she could not make it on her own. She had a website. She was trying to launch. She lived in an apartment. I believe it was in New York. The rent was $3,500. She lived there for free for 6 or 7 months, and then she was evicted in 2014. She came back and sued the landlord and said that it was mold and asbestos, and said that it contributed to her health, and that's why she didn't pay the rent. Contributed to her being unhealthy is a better way for me to say that. Candace Owens couldn't make it work by telling her truth, so she sold her soul. A lot of times what Black folks do. We don't have to participate, Black folks. We don't have to participate. We don't have to play. We don't have to go along with it. We can simply just not see it. Because as long as we don't see it and we don't participate, then she may, in all of her venom and rhetoric that she spews that is disgusting, she may just quietly die off in her sleep, we hope. That's all I'm going to say about that. I told y'all that we would talk about Black on Black crime in Dallas politics. For those of you that may not know and are going to see it at some form because it's being shared, at the time that I saw it, it had been shared 137 times. There is a Black attorney here named Vonda Bailey who has attacked Judge Kim Cooks. Now, in full disclosure, Kim is my friend. Kim is my friend, and I've known her since before she finished law school. She has eaten with me at Thanksgiving dinner. She has been willing to pick my children up for me, and her son. We are friends. We're also sorority sisters. Okay. I don't want to give it a lot of credence, but there is something being said that I think is utterly ridiculous. I want to say this. When Black people attack other Black people openly on Facebook, you have to beware of the message and the messenger. There is a faction of Black women in this city that are being used as pawns and tools, much like Candace Owens, against Black people in Dallas County. I'm sure it goes on in other counties as well. In Dallas County, 52% of the vote is Black. It comes from Black folks, and that's how you win. You have to capture the hearts and minds of 52% of Dallas County Black people to win a county election. Our judges in this city, in this county, are elected, and they sit at county benches. District courts that are considered county elected officials. Eric Moyer, who I've spoken about before, is a judge, a Black man that went to Harvard. He is best friends, by his own telling and touting, with Jeff Dalton. I have spoken about Jeff Dalton in the past as well. Jeff Dalton is a white man that lives in Mcatee in Collin County. He does not run races in Collin County. Now, I understand that he's been smoozing up since 2008 to Collin County Democrats, but it's certainly not the well-oiled machine he would want it to be, like Dallas County Democrats are, because Carol Dalton is the Dallas County chair who is supposed to help facilitate and utilize Dallas County monies for Democratic elected officials. If you hire Jeff Dalton as your political strategist, you get the benefit of Carol Dalton's wielding Dallas County dollars towards your campaign. You also get the benefit of when they have poll workers and all of the things that they do when they come to your house and they're canvassing and giving mail out in Dallas County. I'm sure this works like this in other counties in other parts of the United States, but I can speak specifically about Dallas County. There are a group of what has been deemed, not by me, but by others, the Mean Girl Lawyer Society, Black lawyers, mean girls. There's currently a woman named Jasmine Crockett that is running for the District 100 to be a state representative. She is running against the incumbent state representative, Lorraine Bearable. Lorraine understands what it means to be Black and to fight for Black people. She understands it from a policy standpoint. That's why I am supporting her. But she also understands policy making. She understands pushing policy through. She has demonstrated that in her track record. I have witnessed the mean girl machine from Jasmine Crockett. She has said several times she's a civil rights attorney and I work for y'all. Well, I've seen her not work for us. I've seen her work against someone. She was supporting another judge, and I'm just going to leave her name out of it because it's not her fault. I can't swear that she knew all the things that were going on. Another judge, Simone, was running against that judge. It was an open seat. Neither one of them had won. I witnessed the smear campaign that Jasmine wielded. I'm no stranger to politics. Y'all know my background, so I'm not going to bore you with that. You know my family's history. I'm not going to bore you. But I am saying I don't believe that Black people should or could, under normal circumstances, without the support of a white man, money, and philosophy, attack other Black people. I've seen her do it to the point where it was not about the campaign. It moved far beyond that. It moved into a way where it could have affected the woman's livelihood and her ability to be able to live after the campaign. I witnessed it firsthand. So I can tell you, I have witnessed Jasmine Crockett in particular not being a good person. I am tying these things together with Vonda Bailey loosely, but I will allege this. I will allege the fact that this campaign that Vonda Bailey has against Kim Cook is for her seat. It is not all of the things that she has tried to say. I believe they are untrue. I do believe that because she has gone on to talk about how Sandra Moncrief is her good friend, that this is an attack on Kim so that Kim can possibly lose her seat as judge, because Sandra Moncrief's campaign was supported and strategized by Jasmine Crockett. I will also say that in Texarkana, Texas, Jasmine Crockett left under an air of impropriety. That air of impropriety was stated to pay some aspect of moral turpitude. Now, I'm alleging that. I have heard it several times, but I don't have the paperwork. So this is alleged. But I have people that live in Texarkana, Texas. Jasmine Crockett left Texarkana after she ran for DA and came to Dallas. She is a transplant. She is someone that just popped up out of obscurity, and she is now running for this seat. I have witnessed the thing that she's doing. I am now seeing, live and in color, Vonda Bailey. If they are all part of this mean girl society that I've heard so much about, then you ought to be ashamed of yourself. Because I know for a fact, the last time before last, the election cycle, Jeff Dalton made somewhere like $2.7 million in 2 election cycles when we elected the last judges. I have been told by someone who was running a campaign and they were considering using him. Someone black said he is as racist as one would think. If you are allowing yourself to be used as a tool, much like Candace Owens, as a black person in this city, we will not allow you to continue to do that. We are going to stand up. I know for a fact that Vonda Bailey called Dominique Alexander last fall sometime and was talking about Kim Cooks, the judge I mentioned previously. And Dominique Alexander of the Next Generation Action Network, who is no more than 30 years old and strives to do the right thing. But keep in mind, he's a young man. So they have attacked him as well. Said to her, I'm rolling with Kim. I'm going to continue to roll with Kim. And then he called Kim and told her. There is something going on when black people think the only way to do what they need to do is to attack black people. And that is what is happening with this black on black crime in Dallas politics. And I never use that term because I think it's foolish when no one uses white on white crime. Let me just say this. If white people didn't commit crimes against other white people, there'd be no white people in jail. When we talk about Dallas politics, we are talking about whether or not black people should be able to attack other black people on not the merits, not their character, not whether or not they're actually doing the job, but just make up things and then put it out there. We've all seen people have arguments on Facebook and we think it's silly. I had someone recently tell me that facts didn't matter, perception does. Oh, I beg to differ. Facts absolutely matter. They matter because you tie them to something that's real, that can be, that Twitter can say lie or no lie when I talked about Trump earlier. We need people out here fact checking. And what's happening now in Dallas, where the county with the largest amount of female jurists in the country, no other county has as many black women jurists than Dallas County. The way we see black people going after other black people suggests to me that Jeff Dalton is behind this. Because I've seen what he does. I've seen how he attacks black people. I've also beat him. And if this is what you're doing, there is a consortium of black women, strategists, campaign managers, and the like that are not going to allow you to do this. You want the seat, you want to run for that bench, then you run. And you run on your merits. You run on your track record. But you don't get to destroy another black woman because that's what you want to do. And you will not destroy black men because we are going to start putting black men on the bench because they have a place there too. This is unconscionable. If this is your truth, then you tell your truth. There are means and mechanisms for that. You could tell the Dallas Bar Association, the Texas Bar Association. But instead you took to Facebook. And you ought to be ashamed of yourself. How do you all look yourselves in the mirror, especially in the era of George Floyd, and call yourself black? Black is not the color of our skin, it's a state of mind. And right now, the consciousness of the black state of mind has risen to ranks that has struck all across this world. And you take to Facebook. I am not angry because Kim is just my friend. I'm angry because she's a black woman who feeds the hungry. She is a black woman that supplies toys at Christmas time so that people have toys in shelters and that are in underserved communities so that their children get a little bit of Christmas happy. She is a woman that doesn't just put black men in jail because they can't pay child support when they don't have a job. She partnered with Phoenix House to give them an opportunity to get a job so then that mother then gets money. And the county doesn't just pay for this person to be in jail. She is about healing the Black family. She partners with Andrea Lane, who is a judge who said to a CPS, Child Protective Services worker, who removed children from a grandparent's home because they only had a 3-bedroom and they had 2 children. They had 4 children in 2-bedroom home, and they had 4 children and they had 2 bunk beds. They pulled them out because they said the living conditions. And she said, this is how I grew up. And I think I turned out all right. And she admonished the CPS worker for even pulling those children out of the home. Those are the judges we're putting on the bench in Dallas County. And those are the judges y'all are allowing Jeff Dalton, using you as Candace Owens pawns, to attack, to berate, to belittle, to demean. Now, as far as I know, Vonda Bailey lives in Ellis County, which means she is ineligible to run at the next election because you have to live in Dallas County for 2 years. This is ridiculous, Black people. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Vonda Bailey. And since you don't know to be ashamed of you, I am saying unequivocally and categorically, I am ashamed of you. I am hurt by your actions, even though they're not against me, because I believe that you're being used, and so I pity you. I pity the fact that Sandra Moncrief, when she was running for Kim's bench, I watched her, the things that she did after Monday Night Politics. A group of them blocked off the door and told her, Kim, she better not come this way. Now, she can say what she wants to, but I saw that happen. I have witnessed the things that happen in this county. I've watched how white folks have attacked Black folks. But nothing hurts us more when we watch Black people do it. I have watched how Eric Mourier has been unkind, belittling, demeaning to Black women. I have even experienced it. I have watched what has happened in this county. And in the era of George Floyd, his legacy, the fact that he was able to turn his life around for the betterment of people, and that he has touched a worldwide group of reformists and abolitionists, I am saying this. Stop. Reevaluate who you want to be. You want to be a judge? You're trying to get that $160,000 check because it's hard to be out here in these streets on your own as a sole practitioner hanging up your shingle, because that's why a lot of people running for office in Dallas County who just tell the truth, and the truth does not care who tells it. Then we should be honest about the fact that this has nothing to do with whether or not you feel like these people on the bench are good judges or not. This has to do with you trying to keep your lights on. Because if it was about running for the bench on the merits, you wouldn't stoop to the lows that you do. All right. I think that we've covered a lot of ground here. I want to thank everyone who took the time to listen to me today. I have been very happy to learn that so many of you watch the show, but y'all not commenting and y'all not liking. Please do that for me. It helps me to not get cut off by Facebook. So if y'all like it, I do plan to return to the radio station very soon. I'm gonna make an announcement. I'm excited about that. COVID-19 has kept me at home like everybody else. Thank you all for spending your time with me, joining me, letting me soapbox. But what I try to do is keep it real and keep it 100 and give you the facts, the figures, and statistics and facts, and not just my perception of what's going on. I want to close by saying this. I had a guy that said he did a video, and he said that white people were standing behind them at a rally, and and these are his words, not mine, his influx and his intonation, not mine. White lives matter. White lives matter. He said they weren't saying Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Okay, well, that's how I heard it in my head. This is how I envisioned what he's saying. And he said there was no passion behind the words. And what I said was there was no pain. White people are in this with us again. And it took a movement such as this, a time such as this, that passed the legislation that I speak about all the time, the Civil Rights Act of 1963 and 1965. Because of that, we were able to get that legislation passed. It is because of a kente cloth Congress that we now have no chokeholds. We are stopping no knock warrants. We are talking about what deadly force is when it's actionable and reasonable. We are doing that from a legislative standpoint. So it's not that they don't have passion. They don't have pain. They don't have almost 500 years of suffering. They don't know what it smells like when a body hanging from a noose that has been lynched has been charred because it was burned, not just mutilated. They don't have those stories that we have. Not only has that been my personal experience on my way from Dallas, Texas to Prairie View, and I've talked about it before. What up, Jeter? My boy Brian was with me, and I told y'all I hadn't thought about it in years, and he asked me, do you ever think about it? And I said, no, not really. And he said, I think about it every day. They don't have that kind of pain. See, Brian was not supposed to think about that every day. He was supposed to only hear stories from his grandparents or the stories that his parents said they remember hearing about. But in fact, that is now something that is with him like it is with me. They don't have pain. They don't have the pain of your grandparents being domestics. They don't have the pain that we share in my family from my grandfather owning his own TV and radio repair shop after he graduated from Iowa State University and taught engineering at night. They don't have the pain of listening to when my mother and her siblings heard white folks who were in need of his help standing in his store and calling him boy. They don't have that kind of pain associated with the words Black Lives Matter. They mean what they say. Their words are not hollow. They're just void of the pain. They have empathy and they have compassion. They don't have the pain. They don't have the pain of holding your child, telling them that you don't know if the police are going to shoot them, but you're going to do everything you can to stop it. They don't know the pain of your child saying, but why would he just get off of his neck? They can tell their children he's a bad white guy. And so that stems to this thing that there are some bad apples. You know what? There are bad apples in everything. But let's be real honest about the police departments throughout the United States and law enforcement as a whole. We don't have no firemen out here killing people that we know of. So it's more than just bad apples. And we got some bad firefighters, I'm sure. All right, y'all. I'm going to go ahead and get off of here. I hope you've enjoyed your time with me. I've always enjoyed my time with you. I hope it's cathartic for you, melanated nation, like it is for me. I'm going to tell you, beautiful Black people, that are sun-kissed by God's lips, that you have been just that, created in his image, sun-kissed by his lips, and that you are capable of doing everything and anything you want to do. And now we are doing it throughout the world, and we got allies. So let's see what happens. Many of you, I reached out, I said last week, if you want to join the Public Policy Committee, I had some of you that reached out to me. You are now members of that Public Policy Committee, where we are going to write policy for policing in this city and county, and hopefully we can make some headway in the state. I want to thank you for your time. I want to tell you that I love you, melanated nation, diamond curls and jerry curls, and we'll do it again real soon next week. Same back time, same back channel. This is Coy with your Black Tea Sip. Y'all stay out there powerful and knowing not only who you are, but whose you are.